Hello everyone. We're going to have a look at some unique Australian icons. What's an icon, you ask? An icon is someone or something that is a special symbol, and in this situation, it's a special symbol of Australia. I'd like you to think about the word great. What does it really mean? More specifically, what does it mean to Australians? To us, greatness is a description given to someone with exceptional qualities. For example, he's one of the greats. Or a tag that makes us feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. Mate, that's great. That's really great. As you've probably discovered, Australia is a very unique and a special place. We have some very interesting characters and people living within the country, especially political leaders, war heroes, sports stars, Indigenous icons, business identities, and the battler, and those with a dream who never gave up. There are 5 kinds of Aussie icon. First are the definers. They show who we are to the world and how we are perceived as a country. Second are the trailblazers, the adventurers, stepping into the unknown, doing things for the first time. Third, we have the bestowers of legacy. Their actions are admired and benefited by others. Fourth, the inspirers, motivating people to action and giving hope. And lastly, number 5, the truly unique, the special, one-of-a-kind Australians. An example of a definer is Dame Nellie Melba, the voice of Australia. She was nicknamed the Diamond Diva, who was seen as the greatest soprano of the 19th century, not just in Australia, but also the world. Let's listen to her singing one of her famous songs, Home Sweet Home.
Well, you know you've reached international stardom once a food has been named after you. Dame Melba was so loved that a dessert was made in her honor. Peach Melba. This is a dessert of peaches and raspberry sauce on top of vanilla ice cream. It was invented in 1892 by the French chef Auguste Escoffier in the famous Savoy Hotel in London to honor the Australian soprano Nellie Melba. A sweet dessert to honor a sweet voice. We are now going to look at another definer. This person's name is Lionel Rose. He was one of the first Australian boxers to be known worldwide. He originally came from Melbourne, and he is of Aboriginal descent. When he became quite popular, he flew to Tokyo and competed against a very famous Japanese boxer named Fighting Harada. It took Lionel Rose 5 times to beat this person, as he was really quite ferocious. After 15 rounds of cigarette smoke and a sweat-filled stadium, Harada fell to the ground. Rose was the first Aboriginal to win the World Bantamweight title. This was a very exciting time for Australia, as many Aboriginal athletes were unknown outside of Australians' borders. And this took place in the mid-1960s. Now we're going to have a look at trailblazers. A trailblazer is generally a person who makes the first step at doing something, often in a new country. Another word we often use is pioneer. Trailblazers were often the new explorers, those that went into the middle of Australia to discover new places. This person in particular was a bush nurse by the name of Elizabeth Kenny. She was a trailblazer in her area of nursing and medical because she took on a huge polio epidemic that was that really hurt a lot of people in the early 20th century. And she took care of these people in harsh conditions, in not in a city situation, in the bush. And she was the first to do this, so that's why we refer to her as a trailblazer. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, Nurse Kenny was renowned for her work with polio. Polio was an infectious disease that caused muscle weakness. Most of the weaknesses that happened with people were in their legs, but sometimes they were in their arms. People often complained of headaches and stiff necks. This isn't a disease we see anymore in this century. Thankfully, we've had immunizations, and we hope that we won't have this again in our Western world. It does still exist in some countries that don't get the same medical support that we are fortunate to have here in Australia. So Nurse Kenny was recognized for her work with polio patients, as she helped to cure over hundreds of children in Australia and America from the virus. Traditionally, people in the medical sector thought it was a good idea to put casts or plasters on these limbs and leave those muscles immobilized, and that would help stop spasms. She disagreed. She thought that they needed movement, and thought it was a good idea to put hot compresses on their legs and arms the moment they started to spasm, and then this helped to stop the weakness in the muscles, and eventually they were cured. So she was named America's Most Admired Woman in 1952.
And just as a side note, closer to home, my great-grandmother and my grandmother were friends of Sister Kenny. My grandmother was a nurse, and she worked alongside her helping fight the deadly disease. Another famous trailblazer is Fred Hollows. He was a specialist in treating eye disease and helped outback Aborigines keep their sight. He screened 100,000 people between 1974 and 1976, and he travelled to Asia and Africa curing many more people. He pioneered the Aid Abroad crusades. The Fred Hollows Foundation was established in 1993. He died in September 1992, aged 63 years old. It is estimated his medical contribution has cured over 1 million people of eye disease to this day. We are now leaving the vodcast to watch a video about Fred. Please watch the video about this amazing pioneer in the medical field. Remember to return to the vodcast. Moving on to the bestowers of legacy, Caroline Chisholm. She arrived in Australia in 1838 from England. She discovered homeless migrant women begging in the street and vowed to help them. She was considered a thorn in the government's side. Over 10 years, she pressured the governor to make changes, and finally he gave in. She found housing and jobs for more than 10,000 women and girls. Caroline was the first woman, other than the Queen, to appear on Australian money. Next, we have a famous country and western singer, Slim Dusty, everybody's mate, known as the King of Country Music. His music reminded city dwellers that our origin is really in the outback. He sold more than 7 million records from the 1950s, and he was voted a living treasure in 1997. Slim Dusty is truly an Aussie icon, and he means Australia through and through. Some of his famous songs include A Pub With No Beer, Having a Drink with Duncan, G'day G'day, and Waltzing Matilda. He starred in the closing ceremony of the Sydney Olympics, and he received a state funeral in 2003 in Sydney upon his death. We will leave the vodcast to listen to one of his songs. Please remember to return to the vodcast. Let's listen to G'day G'day. An example of an inspiration to others is Sir Donald Bradman, the world's most dominant sportsman. He was a country boy whose first cricket bat was a homemade cricket stump. He spent hours each day hitting a golf ball against a water tank. When he was 19, he played for New South Wales, and at 20, he played for Australia against England. Nicknamed the Don, he was an inspiration to the nation. It was World War I, where 60,000 Australians had died, and the 1930s depression was upon us. but the Don's spectacular batting gave people hope. An inspiration in the air, Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. He completed the first trans-Pacific flight from America to Australia in 1928. He flew non-stop across Australia and conquered a trans-Tasman flight to New Zealand. He inspired many Australians to take to the air and is seen here on the $20 note. We will leave the vodcast now to watch a short video clip. Please return after watching. You will now watch a short video showing Sir Charles. Now for the truly unique Australians, Dame Edna Everage. "Hello, possums," is her famous welcome. She is much loved worldwide for comedy performances over almost 40 years and a special favourite of Queen Elizabeth and the royal family. So who is she? She is a he. Barry Humphries, a famous comedian, is Edna. Another unique Aussie is Phar Lap, known as Big Red, the horse that helped a nation. During the Depression, he continued winning. He had 36 victories in 41 races and went to America to win their biggest race. He mysteriously died 16 days later. An autopsy revealed his heart was 3 kilograms heavier than a normal horse. The conspiracy remains: who killed Phar Lap? We will now watch a short video and leave the vodcast. Please remember to return. This is a video of the race in America that Phar Lap won.
Another iconic Australian rock band that came shortly after AC/DC was a band called INXS, INXS, pronounced In Excess, which was the motivational name for their band. This band was actually originally created in South Australia, in Adelaide. It was formed by the Ferris brothers. These two brothers were the founding members, a bass player and keyboardist, and also a composer, Andrew and John Ferris. Together, they then found their lead singer and sort of the main character of this band. His name is Michael Hutchence. He had a real presence on stage and was known as probably the most iconic rock icon in Australia during the 1980s and 90s. For 20 years, INXS was fronted by Hutchence, whose stage presence made him a main point of the band. They were known for their sort of new wave pop style, and then later developed into a harder, what they would call pub rock style. INXS scored their first #1 hit in Australia with a song called Original Sin. The band would then achieve international success in the 1980s until the mid-1990s with the hit albums Listen Like Thieves, Kick, and X. Singles such as What You Need, Never Tear Us Apart, Suicide Blonde, and Devil Inside were well known all over the world. Unfortunately, Michael Hutchence died in 1997 from suicide. INXS continued to make appearances after his passing, but the band was never the same without him. They did win 6 different ARIA awards. ARIA is the Australian Recording Industry Association, and were won awards for Best Group in the 1987, 89, and 92, and then they were inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2001. The estimated sales of their records worldwide are about 60 million records. This year, one of Michael Hutchence's friends has put together a documentary about his life with images of him throughout his years as a performer. And it came out this July in Australia. It's called Mystify. We'll now leave the vodcast and watch a short interview with Michael Hutchence talking about his career as a musician and his rise to fame. Please remember to come back to the vodcast after you finish watching the interview.
And finally, we finish with AC/DC, Australia's hard rock band since 1973. They are the pioneers of heavy metal and sold more than 200 million records worldwide, including 71.5 million in the USA alone. In 2010, they ranked number 23 of the 100 greatest artists of all time. One of their all-time popular songs, thunderstruck. You may know it.
That brings us to the end of the lecture for this week. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Please don't forget to do the lecture task at the end of the form, and for those of you on the High Bank to also do the reading task. Thank you.